My name is Dr. Piyush Patel from Human Work for Animal, and together with Dr. Vrushti Mawani, I'm pleased to present our study on pet dog trade in India. Our presentation explores how the growing commodification of dogs is creating significant welfare concerns and contributing to abandonment, and what actions can be taken to address these challenges. So, some of you must be aware about the growing population in India. India's pet dog population has grown rapidly from approximately 12.6 million dogs in 2014 to 33.6 million dogs in 2023. And this is projected to exceed 50 millions by 2028. What is particularly interesting is that this growth has happened alongside a rapid urbanization and challenging lifestyle. Increasingly, dogs are being marketed as a lifestyle choice and status symbol rather than companion whose welfare needs must be met through their life, through their entire life. We wanted to understand what happens when commercial demand grows faster than awareness and regulation in pet parents. Uh, and we are seeing very concerning trends. Almost half of current and former pet owners reported abandoning or relinquish a dogs at some point of time. Additionally, 72% of puppies are brought home before the 8 weeks of age, despite regulations are prohibiting this. While media reports frequently highlight welfare concerns, there has been a little systemic research or almost no research examining the pet dog trade. So this study was to design to fill that gap. Our research had three primary objectives. First, to understand how welfare is compromised across the life of the dog, from breeding and selling to ownership and abandonment. Second, to identify violation of existing breeding, transport, and marketing regulations. And third is to develop a practical recommendation that can help reduce commodification and abandonment while improving our welfare outcomes. To understand this issue from multiple perspectives, we interviewed and surveyed a broad range of stakeholders. This includes breeders, pet dog owners, pet shop owners, traders, private practicing veterinarians, dog owners, adopters, rescuers, shelters, and former owners who had relinquished their dogs. Um, the primary study areas were Ahmedabad and Hyderabad. These are the two big cities in India, while the additional data was collected from other locations where our team has already been working in India. This approach allowed us to examine the entire supply chain and ownership journey.
And what emerged from our research was a consistent pattern. And the pattern was that welfare isn't compromised at a single point. Instead, welfare challenges occur throughout the system. Throughout the trade, from breeding and transport to ownership and abandonment. So, we'll now walk you through our six key findings that emerged from this research. And one of the most striking findings was the relationship between the popularity of breeds and abandonment, as well as overall welfare concerns. So, Labradors, Golden Retrievers, and Shih Tzus were among the most commonly owned and heavily promoted breeds. And interestingly, the popularity of these breeds is not always linked to suitability. Many people chose breeds based on appearance, social media influence, or recommendations from breeders and sellers, rather than considering factors such as exercise needs, grooming requirements, temperament, or long term healthcare costs. And this mismatch between expectations and reality often became apparent only after the dog arrived in the household. And breeders naturally focused on breeds with the strongest market demand. And maybe it might be apparent that these same breeds are also reported as being the most commonly abandoned. which suggests that commercial demand is driving overbreeding and oversupply, while many buyers might not fully understand the long-term commitment required to care for these animals. Our second finding was that the sale of underage puppies was widespread and is widespread. So 72% of purchased or gifted puppies we found were brought home before 8 weeks of age. Many were separated from their mothers at only 3 to 5 weeks. And many of us might know that puppies learn important social and behavioral skills from their mothers and their litter mates during the first 8 weeks of life. So, separating them too early not only affects their physical health and their immunity, but can also contribute to behavioral problems later in life. Yet, commercial pressures often encourage breeders to sell puppies as quickly as possible in order to reduce costs and to increase their profits. More than 90% of the breeders and traders that we spoke to admitted that they routinely sell puppies below the age of 8 weeks, which is the legal age limit prescribed by the 2017 breeding rules in India. And the consequences of this are significant. What we found was that nearly half of the puppies that had been separated so early in life developed health problems soon after purchase, particularly parvovirus infections and skin diseases. And this finding highlights a major welfare concern as well as a clear failure of enforcement. Um, the welfare concerns do not end at breeding. So, our third finding was that approximately 42% of breeders and traders reported sending puppies to the buyers through long distance bus networks. Several respondents described transport arrangements where puppies changed hands multiple times before reaching the buyer. In many cases, the buyer never sees the breeding facility or meets the mother dog or even the seller for that matter. The transaction happens entirely over phone calls, social media, or messaging platforms. And this disconnect then makes it easier for welfare concerns to remain hidden from consumers. And it's sad that we call them consumers, but that's what it ends up being. Many of these puppies are only 1 to 1.5 months old. They're often transported in boxes or crates for journeys lasting many hours or sometimes even days without adequate food, water, supervision, or temperature control. And the reality is that many puppies are transported more like cargo than as living beings. Another important finding was the misinformation that was given by breeders and traders to prospective owners. What we found particularly concerning was that almost no sellers discussed the true responsibilities associated with bringing a dog home. Conversations were heavily focused on breed characteristics and purchase decisions, but rarely addressed training requirements, veterinary expenses, behavioral management, or the commitment involved over the dog's lifetime. And when owners later encountered behavioral issues, financial costs, or management challenges, many were overwhelmed because they were not prepared. So, the veterinarians that we spoke to consistently identified behavioral problems as a leading contributor to abandonment. At the same time, many sellers actively encouraged owners to breed their dogs for profit, thereby creating that continuous cycle of backyard breeding and further commodification. Our finding five is on abandonment. And abandonment, like we know, has serious consequences for both dogs and communities. What we found was that many abandoned dogs suffer from chronic medical conditions, including skin diseases, arthritis, and parasitic infestations. As well, behavioral impacts are severe, with anxiety, fearfulness, and aggression being commonly reported. So these outcomes aren't limited to the dogs only, they also affect public safety. One important takeaway from our findings was that abandonment does not simply shift responsibility from an owner to an animal welfare organization. Rather, the impacts ripple outward. Shelters become overcrowded, rescuers face increasing demands, municipal authorities encounter greater community concerns, and ultimately, the dogs themselves suffer the most. Most veterinarians and animal welfare volunteers that we spoke to reported a link between abandonment and increased human dog conflict, particularly where abandoned dogs become fearful, territorial, or difficult to manage. Finally, our last key finding was that across the pet trade, we found widespread violations of existing regulations. So, underage sales are common, buyer screening is rarely conducted, vaccination and microchipping requirements are frequently ignored, and most breeders appear to operate without registration. Importantly, perhaps the finding here is that these insights do not necessarily indicate a lack of laws. India already has a reasonably comprehensive regulatory framework governing breeding, transport, and sale. Rather, what our findings suggest is a substantial gap between legislation on paper and implementation on the ground.
Thank you, Vrushti. So, based on all these findings, we develop recommendations across different levels. We mainly wanted to start with first three levels. First was media and public awareness. Of course, that's the most important pillar. The second was policy and advocacy. And third was direct field intervention. And meaningful change will require action across all these three areas simultaneously. Public awareness plays a critical role in reducing demand for unethical practices. We need campaign that educate buyers about responsible ownership, the danger of purchasing underage puppies, and the reality of caring a dog uh, throughout its lifetime. We must also expose these unsafe transport practices and challenges and challenge the growing normalization of backyard breeding. Ultimately, the informed consumer can become a powerful force of change. That's the most easiest way to deal with this situation. At the policy level, also, stronger enforcement is essential. We often say that in India is we are overly legislative and underly executed country. So we do have a pet shop and pet breeding rules, but they are not properly implemented. Transport regulations also does exist, but that require greater monitoring. Registration of pets and microchipping should be standardized and strengthened. Also, most importantly, there is a provision of penalties under Prevention of Cruelty to Animal Act, but that needs a lot of updation so that the violation carry meaningful consequences. Without accountability and the compliances will definitely remain low. And the last suggestion we have is about field level actions. This is also equally important. This includes training of the transport authority. Since this is not a priority area, it's very unfortunate that many government authorities do not know the laws and regulation around pet transport. Strengthening state animal welfare board at each level, improving coordination between departments, and engaging veterinary professions, the private practitioners, and the government vets as a key advocates for responsible ownership. So, building institutional capacity will be very critical for translating policy into this practice. So, to conclude, I mean, we have of course we have discussed about the recommendations and all, but I mean, we what we have found out through this study is that most dog owners genuinely care about their dogs. However, a system driven by commercial incentive, misinformation, and weak enforcement often sets both dogs and owners up to fail. The same breed promoted most aggressively are often the ones abandoned most frequently. Breaking this cycle requires coordinated action across awareness, policy, and enforcement levels. So, by addressing commodification and prioritizing welfare, we can create better outcomes for dogs, the dog owners, and communities. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Piyush. So just to wrap up, ultimately, this is not just a story about pet dogs. It is a story about what happens when living beings are treated primarily as commodities. And the evidence from our studies suggests that welfare challenges, abandonment, and human animal conflict are not isolated problems. Rather, they are interconnected outcomes of the same system. And if we want lasting change, we must address the root causes rather than simply responding to the consequences. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Now, I think we can open the session for questions. Thank you.